This leads directly into the genetics versus trauma argument as well. Where does it come from? And I know, I mean, you both have some strong opinions about that, but Dr. Salerno, what do you think?
What do I think it is? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I already know what you're going to say, but I mean, for both of you, when it comes to where this comes from and where the empathy deficiencies come from, is it there from birth? Does it happen throughout a child's life and then those empathy deficiencies happen later? Just having that discussion about it.
Well, I think one thing that I think it's important to point out is in the field of psychology, for one reason or another, there has been this historical dismissal of anything genetic, right? I mean, and there's even, if you're familiar with the work of Robert Plomin, you know, he's behavioral genetics researcher for 40 years. He actually said he was reluctant or felt like he couldn't even publish a book related to genetics and psychology for 30 years because he was going to be fired, or, you know, something bad was going to happen because people weren't ready for it, right? They were still subscribing to these classical views. So I think just bringing up the possibility that there's a genetic influence when we talk about these disorders is controversial in and of itself. And it's going to lead to people being vehemently opposed, offended, possibly who don't even necessarily know what is meant by the term genetics. And I think there's also this fear that if it's genetic, as people understand genetic, that these are running in families and you know, I can't help but give birth to the next, you know, serial killer or whatever. And that's just really not how it works either. But I will say that from the research, if you look in research in behavioral genetics and some fields in neuroscience, a little bit outside the realm of classical psychology, classical theory, you're going to find that there are, you know, ways of being that tend to be a little bit more inflexible than we would like to admit at times. And it can, to a large degree, set the tone for how people are going to express themselves in any environment, right? I'm not ruling out the childhood adversity theory and saying that environment doesn't matter at all. And sure, there are some people with certain temperaments that are so extreme that if they are abused, it's only going to make things worse. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Simon, but in clinical practice, there are human beings who end up in your office or your agency for one reason or another who have not had a history of adversity and who have been some of the worst characters you could imagine.
And vice versa too.
Yes. And there have been people who have been so brutally mistreated and abused, and they are the kindest, sweetest, most, you know, amazing human beings you'd ever want to, you know, spend alone time with. And so I think the discussion should be more about, again, getting out of this dichotomous thinking that all character disturbed individuals had a terrible childhood and vice versa, right? Like we need to start thinking that if there's even one exception to a theory, the theory needs to be revisited.
Yeah.
And
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I've been on this bandwagon for years. Let's bring back some scientific skepticism to science. And the evidence is mounting quite clearly that we have underweighted the influence of biological factors of all type, not just genetic factors, but other biological factors too. We've just underweighted them. There was this behavioral revolution, you know, and it changed the face of psychology, but we got carried away. Once again, we overgeneralized. And you're absolutely right. When you find that exception, you've got to explain why your theory falls apart. You know, if your theory is right, how do you explain this glaring exception? You know, clearly your theory needs some modification. And we're not very good about that. I think, unfortunately, mental health sciences, social sciences suffer from this scientific error more than the other sciences, but all the sciences are guilty these days, unfortunately. I think our way of even conducting experiments has become very, very flawed. We're way too dependent on statistical analyses and correlational studies. We're taught in school you can't draw inferences about causality from correlational data. We do it all the time, constantly,
All the time.
constantly.
Yeah.
And I think, Dr. Salerno, what the issue you've run into is people try to generalize what you say, and people will straw man what you say, for lack of a better word. And they'll say, Dr. Salerno thinks it's 100% genetic, the end. And that's what I hear people say. But that has never been what you have said, in my experience. That's not what I've heard you say.
I don't remember saying it.
Right.
I remember it being said about me, but I think even, we have to be clear on what genetics means. I think people, again, they feel like genetics means that something stops at birth and then you just are. And it talks about, we talk about genetics, and then Dr. Simon just mentioned there are other biological underpinnings that are not necessarily classically genetic that also influence who we are and how we are. So we're just trying to bring, non-shared environmental experiences into the picture, and just environmental experiences in general. It can't account for 100% of the way somebody is at this point in what we know.
What's an example of one of those biological underpinnings that's not genetic?
Who are you asking?
Either one of you. I mean, Dr. Simon mentioned it too, but.
Well, I can think of one thing that we know has a strong biological component. How much of it is genetic, I'm not sure we know just yet. But, some of the pioneering research on psychopathy noted one very reliable factor in early childhood, and that was what we call this lack of adaptive fearfulness that results in daredevilish type of behavior, where parents just get a fright because the child does something and it's clearly just laden with risk all over the place. There doesn't seem to be any rationale to it, but without any compunction whatsoever, nothing to hold the child back, no sense of internal disquieting over doing the thing, jumping off a building or whatever, without any sense that I could be injured or whatever. This seems very self-defeating. And boy, the analysts could read all kinds of unconscious things into that. But it's just this lack of adaptive fearfulness. And when you combine that with a lack of empathy capacity, I just do, and I don't care. You combine those two, boy, you got trouble.